Richard Poplak is set to launch his new book, Untitled Julius Comes, and he's joining me in studio to speak a little bit more about it. Now, really, you couldn't have chosen a better time to launch this book, could you?
No, it's kind of like Julius Malema works for me or something. He's on my PR team. It's all gone crazy. It's loony out there right now. So, it's a pretty good time to have the book out there, I suppose.
So tell us about the book. What can we expect from it?
Well, it was always intended as a sort of capsule of capturing the sort of insanity that was the 2014 election campaign. So the title of the book, Until Julius Comes, is of course derived from Jacob Zuma's famous statement, the ANC will rule until Jesus comes. And I encountered a young man in one of the downtown rallies in Joburg CBD who said to me, no, they're not going to rule until the ANC comes, they're going to rule until Julius comes, which I guess kind of ended up being the meme of the election campaign. It was the rise of Julius Malema and the EFF and pretty much the decline of everybody else.
Now, you've written it from the perspective of Hannibal Lecter. Speak to us about that.
Well, Hannibal Lecter is kind of my alter ego. He's this guy who exists, I think, deep in the heart of all of us. He's fueled by whiskey and hard drugs and such what. I sort of covered the election from his perspective. You know, I was working late at night, early into the morning. These pieces were written quickly. They were written, under fire. And he's sort of based loosely on Hunter S. Thompson. So that he's my guy, who I pull out when I need to.
And I suppose any guy who's dealing with South African politicians day in and day out needs to be a little bit hardened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the duress dealing with these guys, it's not even the physical duress, it's just the mental. It's like, what are we listening to? What are we experiencing here? So any crutch you can get, you use, and Hannibal Lecter is definitely my crutch. He's a funny guy. He's a little bit of a lunatic himself, and so it sort of made sense to transfer all of this material through the filter of this alter ego.
Now, of course, in your book we can read quite a lot about Julius Malema, but you've also honed in on the other big political figures that we've all been focusing on, especially in our election year.
Yeah. Jacob Zuma, you'll be unsurprised to learn, stars in this book, as does Helen Zille, Mmusi Maimane, who's now the DA head of parliament. Everybody. They all sort of move through all of these pieces. So if you think of the book as a series of vignettes over the course of the 5-6 month election campaign, and it actually kicks off with that memorial in F&B Stadium for the death of Madiba. So that's sort of where I identified the fact that, okay, we've ended this sort of cycle of history in South Africa. Our father is now gone, and now we kind of have to fend for ourselves. And, off I went into the political jungle and sort of started investigating these stories. So each chapter is sort of one vignette that takes a look at either a personality or one of the events or riots or uprisings that happened over the course of the election.
In fact, Nelson Mandela's memorial is a great place to start, considering that was where President Zuma was booed very publicly, one of the first times.
That's correct. And I mean, so much happened at that memorial. If you think about it, that sort of kicked off the election cycle campaign. First of all, Jacob Zuma was booed. And we understood that while the ANC might win a majority again, they certainly wouldn't win a popular mandate. The other thing that happened there was the fact that the sign language gentleman was actually signing to angels and was having a schizophrenic episode and had somehow been allowed by the ANC to get a contract to stand up next to some of the most important people in the world. There was all sorts of undercurrents that were happening at that memorial service, apart from the fact that it was incredibly emotional. That sort of seemed like the right place to start the book and to kick off what turned out to be a very, very significant election campaign. I mean, I think that was in many respects the turning point for this country.
Now, as you and I sit here, the entire country is speaking about Julius Malema, the EFF, and they're demanding for some type of reckoning from President Zuma in Parliament. And it seems like it almost is Julius Malema's time in the spotlight. Did you foresee that?
I don't want to give myself too much credit. I think that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of people in this country who understood that Julius Malema was this force who was going to be reckoned with. What's so interesting is that he's just been able to play to the fact that into the ANC's silence. Now, the ANC has always been their strategy has always been, zip it, keep stum, and whatever happens, happens. And it's been a very good strategy. They have a good story to tell, no bad story to tell, don't acknowledge anything bad. What Malema understands is to push, and that's what he's done so effectively. So we see all of this cracking, and I think we saw that last week when Malema went after Jacob Zuma in Parliament. No opposition party has been able to do that up till now, but it's certainly starting to happen. So watching the EFF's rise has been, I think, one of the most fascinating political stories in the history of this country, and that's certainly what Until Julius Comes tracks to some extent.
Now, Until Julius Come launches tomorrow, but this isn't your first book. Speak to us about your first.
Yeah, so my first book was written about 8 years ago, and it looked at growing up white during the apartheid era. And what I wanted to do, which is what I do with a fair bit of my work, is try to look at something incredibly serious, take it incredibly seriously, but also be very funny about it. And that's certainly what I tried to do with my first book, which is called Ya No Man, Growing Up White in Apartheid Era South Africa. And then I followed that up with a book called The Sheikh's Batmobile, which looked at American pop culture in the Muslim world. So I went to, I think, 12 or 13 Muslim countries, many of which were at war at the time and still are. Afghanistan, Syria, Saudi, all over, Iran. And I looked at how American pop culture influences these, especially the youth in these cultures. And this was right before the Arab Spring. Everybody thought the Arab world would be locked in stasis forever, but it wasn't. We saw what happened there. And I think that's a lesson for South Africa as well. Just because we think things are trucking along so just evenly and the ANC will be around forever, I would love our government to take some very, very serious lessons from what happened north of us over the course of the past few years.
Now, how can we get our hands on a copy of your book?
I think you can go anywhere. Exclusives, Kalahari, pretty much anywhere.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to us today, and best of luck with the book launch.
Thank you very, very much.